Hello and welcome. My name is Edward Skidelsky and I'm a philosopher. Philosophers are meant to think about things as they are absolutely, not as they seem to people at this or that moment in time. What is justice? What is virtue? Not here and now, but everywhere and always. Now, I've never been very happy with this approach. Perhaps it makes sense in the case of logical or mathematical concepts, but when it comes to moral concepts, that's my own particular area of expertise, I think it's all wrong. I don't think that there is any such thing as the concept of justice or virtue. I think there are only various conceptions of justice and virtue, which change as the structure of society changes. And so I got interested in the history of moral concepts: justice, courage, charity, chastity, and so forth. But what evidence do we have for the changing understanding of these concepts? Historians draw on many sources: novels, sermons, diaries, letters, even works of moral philosophy. But one source has been largely overlooked, even though it surrounds us everywhere. I mean the epitaphs carved onto tombstones and plaques in churches all over England. So I became fascinated with these epitaphs. I started taking photographs of them, at first casually, then methodically, and finally obsessively. Trips to churches and cathedrals became little more than excuses to add to my ever-growing collection, much to the annoyance of my family. Eventually, after I'd collected several hundreds of these images, I had the idea to create a website to organise and to display them. And so, with the help of a technically savvy friend, Virtues of the Dead, epigraphs.net was born. Here you see it. Now, on one level, this website is just a collection of interesting and attractive objects. So here are a couple of my favourites, both from local churches. On the left here, you have the tombstone of Samuel Friend, a young boy who's buried in the church of St Petrox in Lidford on Dartmoor, just a few miles from Exeter. I think it's a rather wonderful carving there, this naive carving of an angel with great big googly eyes and a huge thing that looks like a pipe, but I think is meant to be a horn. And then over on the right, you have the tomb of Elizabeth Butler, who's buried in St Martin's, right in the centre of Exeter, with a skull and crossbones, as you can see. That was quite common in the 17th century. And there are many more. Really beautiful and interesting images like this. But the real power of the website, from a researcher's point of view, lies in the searches which you can carry out using it. Suppose you're interested in the history of the social graces, so qualities like elegance, polish, suavity, urbanity, and so forth. And let's say you want to know at what point in time these words became popular. All you do is you click on the corresponding boxes, here you see on the bottom of this chart, and then all the epitaphs containing those words will come up, grouped decade by decade, as you can see here. And as you can see, it was in the late 18th century, the Regency period, the period of Jane Austen, that people were most often remembered for their elegance, suavity, urbanity, and so forth, which is perhaps what you might have expected. Or let's say you're curious to know about the concept of prudence, that is, the virtue of careful and skillful deliberation. And let's say you're interested to know if it was primarily a virtue of men or women. So using my website, you can find out. Simply click on prudence, and all the epitaphs containing that word will come up, again grouped decade by decade, and divided into men and women. And what you'll see is a marked change round about 1720, 1730. Before that date, prudence is mentioned only in connection with women, after it, only in connection with men, with one exception, that is Harriet North, the Countess of Guildford, who died in 1874 and is described on her plaque as a woman of great firmness, prudence and honour, and a faithful member of the Church of England. Why this sea shift? I'm not sure exactly, but I suspect it has some connection with the declining importance of the household as a unit of production. In the 17th century, a wife of the upper class would be expected to look well to the ways of her household, as the book of Proverbs has it. So manage the books, look after tenants and servants, and so forth. Prudence would have been one of her essential attributes. But over the course of the 18th century, as managers took over the running of grand estates, the wife's role was reduced to that of a companion and support to her husband and children. Tenderness, sweetness, and love were now the virtues required of her, not prudence. Prudence became a masculine quality, something hard, dry, and self-seeking, as I think it still is today. Another shift in attitudes concerns death and the hereafter. Earlier tombstones speak of the resurrection of the deceased as a straightforward matter of fact, rather like getting up after a long sleep. Her soul resteth with God till the general resurrection, when she shall rise again, runs one. Herein lieth deposited his mortal part, until it shall be raised up unto immortal life and glory, proclaims another. But later, towards the end of the 18th century, the afterlife loses this matter-of-fact solidity. It comes to be seen through a mist of human emotions, as an object of hope or a source of consolation. Bodies are no longer raised up out of beds of clay, rather spirits are wafted or translated to their divine abode. Heaven has become a matter of poetry, not fact. And we can display this shift graphically. On my website, I divide mentions of heaven into those which are certain and those which are merely anticipated. And as this chart shows, the former, so mentions of the afterlife as something certain, gradually give way to mentions of the afterlife as something anticipated. So heaven becomes something hoped and longed for, as opposed to part of the solid fabric of reality. And then finally, towards the very end of the 19th century, as you can see, heaven simply ceases to be mentioned at all. The modern era of unbelief has dawned. So, all very interesting, you might say, but what does any of this have to do with philosophy? Quite a lot, I think. Modern moral philosophers spend a lot of time puzzling over what justice or prudence really is. Tombstone epitaphs remind us that there is no such thing as what justice or prudence really is. There is simply justice at this time and place, or prudence at that time and place. If you want to understand the moral concepts that we use today, you have to look to their history. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the talk.